Eyel demanded no more about the traitor, and Arthur told how the man had deserted Powys and come to Dumnonia seeking revenge because his wife had abandoned him for one of Gorfethid's chieftains. Eyel spoke with his council while the two wizards gibbered at Nimue. One of them pointed a human thigh bone at her, but Nimue merely spat. That gesture seemed to conclude their war of sorcery, for the two wizards shuffled backwards as Nimue stood up and brushed her hands. Eyel's council haggled with us. At one point they insisted that we yield all the big war horses to them, but Arthur demanded all their war dogs in return. Then finally, in the afternoon, the Saxons accepted the offer of Rattay and Arthur's gold. It was, maybe, the greatest hoard of gold ever paid from a Briton to a Saxon, but Eyel also insisted on taking 2 hostages, who, he promised, would be released if the attack on Rattay did not prove to be a trap laid by Gorfethid and Arthur together. He chose at random, picking 2 of Arthur's warriors, Balin and Lanval. That night we ate with the Saxons. I was curious to meet these men who were my birth brothers, and even feared I might feel some kinship with them. But in truth I found their company repellent. Their humour was coarse, their manners loutish, and the smell of their fur-wrapped flesh sickening. Some of them mocked me by saying I resembled their king, Eyel, but I could see no likeness between his flat, hard features and what I believed my own face to be. Eyel finally snarled at my mockers to be silent, then gave me a cold stare before bidding me to invite Arthur's men to share an evening meal of huge cuts of roasted meat, which we ate with gloved hands, gnawing into the scalding flesh until the bloody juices dripped from our beards. We gave them mead. They gave us ale. A few drunken fights started, but no one was killed. Eyel, like Arthur, stayed sober, though the Bredvalder's 2 wizards became foully drunk, and after they fell asleep beside their own vomit, Eyel explained that they were madmen in touch with the gods. He possessed other priests, he said, who were sane, but the lunatics were thought to possess a special power that the Saxons might need. "We feared you would bring Merlin," he explained. "Merlin is his own master," Arthur answered, "but this is his priestess." He gestured at Nimue, who stared one-eyed at the Saxon. Eyel made a gesture that must have been his way of averting evil. He feared Nimue because of Merlin, and that was good to know. "But Merlin is in Britain?" Eyel asked fearfully. "Some men say so," I answered for Arthur, "and some say not. Who knows? Maybe he is out there, in the dark." I jerked my head towards the blackness beyond the firelit stones. Eyel used a spear shaft to prod one of his mad wizards awake. The man yowled piteously, and Eyel seemed content that the sound would avert any mischief. The Bredvalder had hung Sansam's cross about his neck, while others of his men wore Innis Widron's heavy gold torques. Later in the night, when most of the Saxons were snoring, some of their slaves told us the tale of Durocobrivus's fall, and how Prince Geraint had been taken alive and then tortured to death. The tale made Arthur weep. None of us had known Geraint well, but he had been a modest, unambitious man who had tried his best to hold back the growing Saxon forces. Some of the slaves begged us to take them away with us, but we dared not offend our hosts by granting the request. "We shall come for you one day," Arthur promised the slaves. "We shall come." The Saxons left next afternoon. Eyel insisted we wait another whole night before leaving the stones, to make certain we did not follow him, and he took Balin, Lanval, and the man from Powys with his warband. Nimue, consulted by Arthur on whether Eyel would keep his word, nodded, and said she had dreamed of the Saxons' compliance and of the safe return of our hostages. "But Rattay's blood is on your hands," she said ominously. We packed and made ready for our own journey, which would not begin until the next day's dawn. Arthur was never happy when forced to idleness, and as evening came he asked that Sagramore and I walk with him to the southern woods. For a time it seemed that we wandered aimlessly, but at last Arthur stopped beneath a huge oak, hung with long beards of grey lichen. "I feel dirty," he said. "I failed to keep my oath to Benwick. Now I am buying the death of hundreds of Britons." "You could not have saved Benwick," I insisted. "A land that buys poets instead of spearmen does not deserve to survive," Sagramore added. "Whether I could have saved it or not," Arthur said, "does not matter. I took an oath to ban and did not keep it." "A man whose house is burning to the ground does not carry water to his neighbour's fire," Sagramore said. His black face, as impenetrably tough as Ael's, had fascinated the Saxons. Many had fought against him in the last years, and believed him to be some kind of demon summoned by Merlin, and Arthur had played on those fears by hinting that he would leave Sagramore to defend the new frontier. In truth, Arthur would take Sagramore to Gwent, for he needed all his best men to fight Gorfythid. "You weren't able to keep your oath to Benwick," Sagramore went on, "so the gods will forgive you." Sagramore had a robustly pragmatic view of gods and man. It was one of his strengths. "The gods may forgive me," Arthur said, "but I don't. And now I pay Saxons to kill Britons." He shuddered at the very thought. "I found myself wishing for Merlin last night," he said, "to know that he would approve of what we are doing." "He would," I said. Nimue might not have approved of sacrificing Rattay, but Nimue was always purer than Merlin. She understood the necessity of paying Saxons, but revolted at the thought of paying with British blood, even if that blood did belong to our enemies. "But it doesn't matter what Merlin thinks," Arthur said angrily. "It wouldn't matter if every priest, druid and bard in Britain agreed with me. To ask another man's blessing is simply to avoid taking the responsibility. Nimue is right. I shall be responsible for all the deaths in Rattay." "What else could you do?" I asked. "You don't understand, Derval," Arthur accused me bitterly, though in truth he was accusing himself. "I always knew Ael would want something more than gold. They're Saxons. They don't want peace, they want land. I knew that. Why else would I have brought that poor man from Rattay? Before Ael ever asked, I was ready to give. And how many men will die for that foresight? 300? And how many women taken into slavery? 200? How many children? How many families will be broken apart? And for what? To prove I'm a better leader than Gorfythid? Is my life worth so many souls?" "Those souls," I said, "will keep Mordred on his throne." "Another oath," Arthur said bitterly. "All these oaths that bind us. I am oath-bound to Uther to put his grandson on the throne. Oath-bound to Leodogran to retake Henniswaeren." He stopped abruptly, and Sagramore looked at me with an alarmed face, for it was the first either of us had ever heard about an oath to fight Direnak, the dread Irish king of Clain, who had taken Leodogran's land. "Yet of all men," Arthur said miserably, "I break oaths so easily. I broke the oath to Ban, and I broke my oath to Cynwyn. Poor Cynwyn." It was the first time any of us had ever heard him so openly lament that broken promise. I had thought Guinevere was a sun so bright in Arthur's firmament that she had dimmed Cynwyn's paler lustre into invisibility. It had seemed the memory of Powys's princess could still gall Arthur's conscience like a spur, just as the thought of Rattay's doom galled him now. "Maybe I should send them a warning," he said. "And lose the hostages?" Sagramore asked. Arthur shook his head. "I'll exchange myself for Balin and Lanval." He was thinking of doing just that, I could tell. The agony of remorse was biting at him, and he was seeking a way out of that tangle of conscience and duty, even at the price of his own life. Merlin would laugh at me now, he said. Yes, I agreed. He would. Merlin's conscience, if he possessed one at all, was merely a guide to how lesser men thought, and thus served as a goad for Merlin to behave in the contrary manner. Merlin's conscience was a jest to amuse the gods. Arthur's was a burden. Now he stared at the mossy ground beneath the oak's shadow. The day was settling into twilight as Arthur's mind sank into gloom. Was he truly tempted to abandon everything? To ride to Ael's fastness and exchange his existence for the lives of Ratai's souls? I think he was. But then the insidious logic of his ambition rose to overcome his despair, like a tide flooding Innistriebe's bleak sands. 100 years ago, he said slowly, this land had peace. It had justice. A man could clear land in the happy knowledge that his grandsons would live to tell it. But those grandsons are dead, killed by Saxons or their own kind. If we do nothing, then the chaos will spread until there's nothing left but prancing Saxons and their mad wizards. If Gorfithid wins, he'll strip Dumnonia of its wealth. But if I win, I shall embrace Powys like a brother. I hate what we're doing. But if we do it, then we can put things right. He looked up at us both. We are all of Mithras, he said, so you can witness this oath made to him. He paused. He was learning to hate oaths and their duties. But such was his state after that meeting with Ael, that he was willing to burden himself with a new one. Find me a stone, Derval, he ordered. I kicked a stone out of the soil and brushed the earth from it. Then, at Arthur's bidding, I scratched Ael's name on the stone with the point of my knife. Arthur used his own knife to dig a deep hole at the foot of the oak, then stood. My oath is this, he said, that if I survive this battle with Gorfithid, then I shall avenge the innocent souls I have condemned at Rattay. I will kill Ael. I shall destroy him and his men. I shall feed them to the ravens and give their wealth to the children of Rattay. You are my witnesses, and if I fail in this oath, you are both released from all the bonds you owe to me. He dropped the stone into the hole, and the three of us kicked earth over it. May the gods forgive me, Arthur said, for the deaths I have just caused. Then we went to cause some more. We travelled to Gwent through Corinium. Eileen still lived there, and though Arthur saw his sons, he did not receive their mother, so that no word of any such meeting could hurt his Guinevere, though he did send me with a gift for Eileen. She received me with kindness, but shrugged when she saw Arthur's present, a small brooch of enamelled silver depicting an animal very like a hare, though with shorter legs and ears. It had come from the treasures of Sansam's shrine, though Arthur had punctiliously replaced the cost of the brooch with coins from his pouch. He wishes he had something better to send you, I said, delivering Arthur's message. But alas, the Saxons must have our best jewels these days. There was a time, she said bitterly, when his gifts came from love, not guilt. Eileen was still a striking woman, though her hair was now touched with grey, and her eyes clouded with resignation. She was clothed in a long blue woolen dress, and wore her hair in twin coils above her ears. She peered at the strange enamelled animal. "What do you think it is?" she asked me. "It's not a hare. Is it a cat?" "Sagramor says it's called a rabbit. He's seen them in Cappadocia, wherever that is." "You mustn't believe everything Sagramor tells you," Eileen chided me, as she pinned the small brooch to her gown. "I have jewellery enough for a queen," she added, as she led me to the small courtyard of her Roman house.